On today's show, we are delving into the 2025 draft eligibles from the USHL as I present my rankings going into our April draft ranking meeting at Elite Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm your host, Sebastian High, the USHL scout at Elite Prospects, and on today's show, I'm sticking true to that title as we are breaking down my USHL rankings from our most recent draft ranking meeting, which we've covered here on the channel in 2 episodes, which will be linked in the description down below. And if you want to take a look at our penultimate rankings here that came out a week ago, it'll be linked down below as well for your convenience. But before we jump into today's show, which is going to include a full top 28 players in the USHL that I had ranked going into our meeting, as well as another 4 players that are honorable mentions, and also 2 that have very much risen their stocks into this range since our draft meeting occurred about 2 weeks ago for me. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So let's get started here with the rankings, and I'm going to add the rankings here on screen for those watching on YouTube. You'll be able to follow along visually with all the names here, and that is popping up right here at the moment. So kicking it off here in the first segment, we'll be talking about the 1 to 10 range. Then the second, we'll look at picks 11 all the way through 21. And finally, we'll wrap up the show with the final guys on the board. And there's a couple names in here that you may not be familiar with just as of yet, even if you have been following along with the USHL draft class this year. There's some interesting ones here that haven't been ranked even by outlets like NHL Central Scouting, and others that are just very, very well known, like Ivan Ryabkin, who falls at number 10, as we'll discuss at the end of the first segment. So let's just kick things off at the top end. And this is a very interesting kind of year for the USHL because there isn't a standout top 20 player this season. There's nobody in my eyes who has really, really distanced themselves as a true, like, not just first round caliber talent, but a top 15 contender, someone who's pushing up to be not just a top 6 kind of guy, but a pretty likely player in that role, or top 4 if it's on defense. This year, however, the USHL has a lot of players in this late first to early second round glut. You have a lot of guys that are in this range that are pretty tough to separate, in all honesty, because there's a combination of upside and tools, but also some clear weaknesses in terms of raw habits, poor decision-making. Things just need to still come together in order to project into a top 6 capacity to be a really impactful piece at the NHL level. But with all that said, I will say that Vacláv Nestrašil has distanced himself a little bit at number 1. This was not overly difficult for me going into the meeting to select my number 1 player, as it was the entire season going into our draft rankings. And Nestrašil is just such a fantastic player in terms of the physical tools, the violence, the intensity he plays with. He's a really dogged off-puck defensive player, and even in terms of like neutral zone pickpocketing and then just bombing up the ice going the other way. He's a pretty powerful lower body, even though the skating is quite fluid. It's still a bit wonky. It needs some work, but he's just grown into his 6'4" frame, and it's just 190 pounds. So still a lot of frame to kind of fill out. And I believe he's even listed at 6'5" and could even be 6'5.5" now. So he's a really big customer, and the skill as well, the creativity, the puck handling in tight. He's probably the most creative player in tight in the USHL this season. So there's so much going for him here, where I see a pretty clear selection of tools to create a top 6 game out of at the NHL level. But he also has this defensive two-way intense fallback game to play a bottom 6 capacity if he doesn't take that next step in terms of skill. And he's off to the University of Massachusetts next season, going a year earlier, as was reported here in the last week by my colleague Hansa Zufal at Elite Prospects. But Vacláv Nestrašil has really become an intriguing player here in the U.S. Hockey League for the Muskegon Lumberjacks. Moving on to number 2, William Moore. Very interesting and divisive player, a guy that has a lot of tools going for him in terms of the handling skill, the playmaking creativity, the quality of his release. The shot is just very, very strong as well. He's a high IQ guy who anticipates play ahead of him and pretty much anyone else on the ice at this level of play, but the physicality is still an area that needs to crystallize a bit more. We've seen flashes of inside game power type of tools, driving the middle, but he's still so lanky. I mean, at 6'2" and 165 pounds, he's still a really, really small player in terms of that width. Like, he's still a very, very thin guy, and that physical resistance is still a work in progress. But if it's able to take a step in the coming seasons, this is a player with true second line center potential at the NHL level. Moving on, number 3, we have Jack Murtagh, the goal-scoring winger from the NTDP, has a wicked release, constantly moving his feet, very hard worker, and he's also expanded his playmaking and handling game as the years gone on, going a lot more for connective plays rather than just trying to bomb up on his own and trying to rifle a puck into the top corner from the entry on his own. So that adaptability is something I've really liked in his game this season. Plus, he's off to a very strong program next campaign where I think he's really going to elevate his play at Boston University alongside a bunch of talented players. I mean, Cole Hudson feeding pucks to Jack Murtagh, that's going to be a whole lot of fun. Now, going to our second tier, sticking in the first round range, the last player here on the board who I have entirely in the first round, and that's Benjamin Kevan, who may even be jumping up the board here for my final rankings. The last viewing I got of him just this morning was unbelievable. The skill level, the dynamism, the handling ability are all really high end in this year's draft class, and the pace has only continued to go up and up and up. He has a tendency to overhandle pucks at this level, but a lot of that has to do with him lacking support in Des Moines. He's kind of a one-man show in terms of offensive dynamism and creation, and a lot of that has also just led to him cycling around with the puck in the offensive zone, trying to find an open teammate, but just nothing really being there for him to latch onto. So just hangs onto the puck and tries to do something on his own. But still, the pace, the handling, the work rate, the motor, all of these are real elements of strength in Benjamin Kevan's game. So he lands at number 4 in my rankings here for the USHL. And he finished at 27th on our final board, or on our April board at Elite Prospects. So a very clear first round talent for us as a whole, our scouting staff. I'm far from the only one to be a big fan of this guy. So at this point, the first 4 players we've talked about have all landed in the 26 to 30 range on our Elite Prospects board. So I was able to get all of these guys into the first round with a decent amount of popular support around them. Moving up to number 5, a player that I'm a lot higher on than most of our scouting staff, and that's Cole McKinney, a guy I had ranked 27th to 40. He's an intense two-way center, constantly working. I think that the physicality is a real strong element in his game. At 6 feet and 190 pounds, he's listed, but he looks more like 6'1", 200. He's a really, really stocky kind of build and strong on his feet, tough on board battles, constantly moving and leveraging, getting underneath opponents and getting that inside position in his favor. So a player I've really liked in terms of that progression. He's also added a lot of connective playmaking and passing skill and pace as the season's gone on, to the point that he's really become the offensive driver on that top line in terms of just moving the puck up the ice, getting it into the offensive zone with control, moving things and connecting his wingers really, really well. I think this all translates to a very projectable bottom 6 center role at the NHL level. There isn't the amount of skill to really project into a top 6 capacity, but he has a decent shot. The passing's gotten better, as I mentioned, as the year's gone on, and I think that work rate, defensive ability is all going to round out very nicely, especially as he's committed to the University of Michigan next season, where he could even be a top 6 center out of the gate for that team. So he's at number 5 on my board in the USHL, but dropped to number 51 on our Elite Prospects rankings. Jacob Rombach is at number 6 here for me, a big 6'6" left shot defenseman. He's just so rangy, can contain play like no one else in the USHL in this class. Very, very good in terms of the physical initiation, closing his gaps aggressively. The stick and body layering against the rush are all very strong. But what makes him stand out the most is his retrieval game. He's just so pacey on retrievals, constantly checking his shoulders, really making quick reads and quick decisions, and a guy that I think is going to project to the modern hockey game in terms of bringing physicality defensively, killing plays, and moving the puck right back up the ice quickly and with control. He's not the most dynamic player offensively. He doesn't get involved too much, but he's connective. Can make a good couple of passes here to link play between the two wings in the offensive zone. But still, the defensive and breakout game here should really make him a late first, early second range player on draft day, and that's where he falls here on our board. At number 7, we have Ryker Lee, who I had in the 33 to 45 range, and he fell at 37th overall on our elite prospects board, so right in the middle of that span. The skill, the goal scoring ability, the handling, the playmaking creativity are all super high end with this player. Arguably the best among all players on this board. He's a really dangerous offensive guy who has significant top 6 upside at the NHL level. That said, look, the skating is rough. It's rough to watch, but the intelligence and the skill have really been able to compensate for that quite well this season. He's has a pretty stocky build, even at just 6 feet tall. He's pretty strong on his feet, has a wide stance. The skating is rough, but the wide stance gives him a layer of stability, which he's going to have to alter a bit at the NHL pace, certainly. But the foundation there for a dynamic offensive guy who can QB a second power play, just be a really, really good like secondary scorer on a team, on a contending team. I think that he's a very interesting swing to take there in like late first round, early second round range. If it's your second pick or your third pick of the draft and you want to swing hard on upside, this is a guy I would be going for. At number 8, I have Charlie Trethewey. Big right shot defenseman, 6'2", 190 pounds. He's an August 2nd, 07 birthday, so very young for this draft class. And he's a wonderful skater to watch. The physical habits are quite strong and tight. And overall, he's become a lot more solid in his game this season. Very chaotic, hot potato with the puck earlier on in the year, but really solidified his game here as the season has progressed. And a guy that I think could really rise into the upper second round, even into the first round on draft day, because the profile is so interesting with plus level mobility, plus level physicality, decent enough defensive awareness and habits here as the years gone on, keeping his gaps tight, keeping his plays simple on puck rather than trying to find the perfect stretch pass. He's making the first play he sees, and he's become a much more like possession-oriented player here as the years gone on, which they needed in the NTDP with Carter Amico going down to injury. They needed a player to step up into that role of just solidifying things on the right side, and he's gotten bigger minutes here as the season's progressed as a result. At number 9, there is Carter Amico, who I just mentioned, who was injured back in November. Another big right shot defenseman, 6'5", 205 pounds. He's a decent enough skater. I wouldn't say it's a strength in this game, but he's so rangy, really good stick while defending the rush, covers a lot of ground with a really long radius with that long stick and long range, and a very intelligent player, makes consistent good reads, closes his gaps with good timing, is not a guy that's going to drag himself out of position to chase a hit or anything. He's quite controlled in terms of where he finds himself positionally. And there's also a really raw element of high-end handling in his skill set. He's a really, really like comfortable handler with an unlocked top hand, curling the puck around forecheckers, can beat 2 layers of forecheckers quite easily before he went down with injury. We'll see how that knee injury affects the mobility, and overall injuries are a significant concern with this player and his projection at the next level, because he's just had a lot of injuries throughout his career in various places in his body. But overall, he's a player that I think if he hits the NHL, if he's able to stay healthy, this is a player who can really, really lock down his second pairing as a solidifying number 3 or number 4 defenseman. But the injury concerns are a clear aspect here that made him fall down my board, because it's an area of concern that we just can't really predict at this stage. And it's not just about the injury he suffered there that ended his season. And even that was a nothing looking play. He just put his weight on his right leg and it buckled underneath him. There's something to worry about there. But to wrap up the first segment, we have Ivan Ryabkin, a big name player who was like a top 5 consensus player coming into this year's draft overall. Obviously not just in the USHL, as he only transferred in early January after playing in Russia to start the campaign. But very interesting player. I can see the upside here. I mean, the vision to see structures evolving and finding little gaps in them is a real area of strength, and the physicality is just rampant at his most physical. He's probably the most physical player among all forwards in this year's draft class, but it's solely used to channel his rage, to chase hits after plays, being late on hits, and he's gathered loads of penalty minutes in the U.S. Hockey League as a result of that. You've seen a lot less physicality of like establishing position in tight, in like around the crease, boxing out like the actual defenders, planting himself in that position and taking away sight lines. He prefers to like plant himself more on the periphery from the half wall as a playmaking option, where his physicality can't really create much offense. And I think that's been interesting to kind of track with Ryabkin this season, because the work rate, the consistency and engagement, the puck tracking, and overall giving up on defensive sequences are real concerns in my view. But if you're able to channel his intelligence, channel his offensive skill, and get a little bit more pace under him in the offensive zone rather than having to slow play down every single time he has the puck, this might be a top 6 NHL player, but a lot of things have to go right for that. And he's a player that scares me in terms of perhaps potentially topping out as either a violent fourth liner who you always wish could put everything together, or an AHL top scorer or KHL top scorer who just is able to dominate at lower paces, but at that highest pace just isn't able to get his feet underneath him and moving quickly enough to match the opposition. But that's where I stand on Ryabkin, so he falls in my personal 40 to 50 range. But I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. Where do you stand on Ivan Ryabkin? He's such a divisive prospect this season, and I can see the arguments for just about any slot between, I don't know, 20th and 100th overall. So I'd love to hear from you down below. That wraps up the first segment here, looking at the top 10. In the next one, we're going to do a little bit more of a quick fire, breaking down the 11 through 20 range here on the board. But first, a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. Did you know that your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices. No console required. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe or sign into Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. Dive into hundreds of premium titles from EA Sports College Football 25 to Call of Duty Black Ops 6 and Avowed. As easily as you stream your favorite shows, it's gaming made simple, and it's all on your Fire TV. With 4K streaming, watch more than 1.5 million movies and TV episodes from your favorite subscribed services like Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus, and Max, and far more. Head to Amazon.com/FireTV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices including Fire TV Stick 4K 2nd Gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max 1st and 2nd Gen, and Fire TV Cube 3rd Generation. All right, let's keep this episode rolling here in the second segment, breaking down my USHL rankings at Elite Prospects for our meeting. And at number 11, one of my favorite players here, and a guy who's just continually rising up my board ever since he made the leap to the NTDP from the prep school system, and that's Everett Baldwin, a 6-foot right shot defenseman. He's not the heaviest guy in the world at like 180-ish pounds, but he's really strong on his feet and an elite level skater, potentially the very best in the entire USHL class this season. So fluid in all 4 directions, really explosive lower body, can just redirect his momentum so quickly in terms of activating into the offensive zone, and if the puck goes the other way, just immediately boomeranging back into the defensive zone, making up loads of ground. He's really mobile, and the activation, aggression, the overall aggression in his game and closing gaps against the rush is also something I've really liked. And I think this is a player with significant potential as a two-way puck-moving defenseman whose offensive activations have a lot of upside as well, I think, in terms of just how far the offensive game can take him. The handling skill at this stage is a little bit above average, but nothing that really breaks the game open. But the creativity and the mental pace, I think, are real areas of strength that could, in the end, lead to a significant NHL offensive upside on potentially a second pairing. But with his mobility, with the defensive solidity, with these habits that have just really impressed me this season, playing up in competition. I mean, jumping from prep school hockey to the USHL is a pretty large jump, but still Baldwin was able to make that look very, very comfortable here, both earlier on the season when he saw a couple games there with the Cedar Rapids Rough Riders, as well as late in the season when he got into 5 games with the NTDP. He logged 2 assists in those games and was just one of the more refined players, I thought, on the back end on that team, despite having almost no experience at the USHL level. So he comes in at number 11 and could rise even further between now and draft day. At number 12, Aidan Benák. Very skilled, high motor player. He's constantly moving his feet. I think he's been a lot better since being moved over to the wing. So he falls in my 60 to 65 range at the draft, late second, earliest third round swing. The skill is really, really solid, I think, with this player, but he's quite divisive. There are members of our scouting staff at Elite Prospects that don't see him as a draft pick whatsoever, don't think that he should even be drafted, and don't see him as an NHLer long-term whatsoever. I think that with his motor, with the playmaking ability, that he's a guy that I could really take a step into a middle six role at the NHL level, but still a lot has to go right in his development, and he's going to take 4 years minimum to get to that level. So he's a project pick, but a project pick I'd be happy to take on in the middle rounds of the draft. Moving on, we have Edison Engle at 13th, mobile left shot defenseman I have in the 62 to 70 range. Just a great skater, really, really explosive in terms of his lateral mobility to gain separation and make a really good first pass off of retrievals. Making quick breakup decisions is a real strong asset in his game, and he's a player that both I and Mitch Brown have really liked down the stretch here, and he's also a player who can push up into the late second round of our board at the end of the day. At 14th, we have Ashton Schultz, a two-way center with solid details in his game, playing with the Chicago Steel in the USHL, who I have in the 65 to 70 range. He's perhaps trending down a little bit. The overall skill at the NHL level, I think, is a little bit of a question mark in terms of how it's going to translate, but he makes such consistent, smart decisions under pressure in tight, strong defensively, strong motor. I think that the two-way impact, the bottom six potential for this player is quite clear, and it's quite clearly there, but there's a real limitation in how high the skill I think could bring him. But the flashes of power and going inside contact have grown as the years gone on, and Chicago just has not been a very strong team this season, but Schultz has been a real driver there consistently all year long as a top 6 centerman. At 15th overall in the USHL and in the 65 to 75 range overall at the draft, William Belle, a big physical power forward, moves quite well, decent handling skill, decent work rate, but very inconsistent. And the scanning, the awareness needs some work. He's very raw. He's going to need 4 full years in college, but a guy that I think, if everything comes together, could be a really intriguing, third line energy power forward winger who brings some secondary scoring and some decent handling skill. And he's often the University of Notre Dame, or he might be a true primary offensive driver for quite a few years of his college career. Moving on, we have a pair of right shot defensemen who are very different in how they impact the game. Luka Radivojevic is a very mobile, solid transition defender, but undersized right shot defenseman who moves the puck well. And on the other hand, you have Sean Barnhill, who's huge, very physical at 6'5", 205 pounds, is almost double the actual size and volume of Luka Radivojevic. And overall, he's a player I think is going to project nicely as a bottom pairing shutdown defenseman who makes a good first pass, but is very uncomplicated in terms of his offensive game. And at 18th overall, we have Mason Moe from the Madison Capitals, a pretty quick, speedy, quick thinker, and with the puck on his stick as a left shot forward. He can play at center and on the wing as he has this season. And I've quite liked his skill implications this year. He's quite pacey, reads the play well, but the question is the pace going to be enough to elevate him to the NHL level? He might end up as an AHL or European scorer at the peak of his career, but I think that there's enough potential here to take a swing on in the 3rd or 4th round of the draft. On the opposite side of the scale, we have Mace'o Phillips, a very big, very projectable player who's going to be likely playing bottom pairing minutes for a very long time in the NHL. He's 6'5", 214 pounds, thinks the game decently well. The mobility, I think, can be exploited, especially along the boards and beating him wide from more agile, undersized, skillful wingers in the USHL. These slippery players can really get by him, and once he's beat wide, he cannot make up that ground again. The explosiveness, the pivoting ability needs some work in his mobility, but I think he moves the puck decently well. He makes a good first pass, and I think his decision-making under pressure is taking some steps this season as well. So a player that we ranked in the end at like 60th overall at Elite Prospects. So significantly higher than my 75 to 90 range had him, but it was mainly to stay consistent in our board as we were ranking other big physical bottom pairing projection defensemen in that range of the draft. And that's precisely what Mace'o Phillips is. So a lot of this has also to do with just personal valuation and what you want to go after on draft day. At 20th, we have L.J. Mooney, a spark plug, very intense forward. He can play at center and on the wing. If he makes the NHL, it will be as a winger. He is very speedy. The downhill rushes in transition in terms of playmaking incursions at speed. He's a very dynamic player. He can light things up with individual shifts, but the consistency has really been lacking this season. Oftentimes, he's just throwing pucks to the middle of the ice, to the slot, quite blindly under pressure, and there's just no target there in the vicinity. So the efficiency with possession has not really been there this season with LJ Mooney, but a very fun player to watch who, if he hits his upside, could be a second line dynamic playmaker who's just constantly upping the pace, one of the hardest working players on the ice, and brings a decent level of mental pace and playmaking. But the chances of him hitting that upside are probably around 10 or 15%. So when do you want to take that risk is the question. Again, some scouts on our team do not see him as a draftable player whatsoever. I think multiple scouts actually do, but I see him as a player that I would target in like the 4th to 7th round range. I think he's going to be available in that range, and he brings enough skills, I think, to take a swing on. It's not the most likely to hit, but if you do hit, you're getting a pretty interesting player. But that wraps things up here for the second segment. And the final one, we'll wrap up the show with picks 21 through 28, as well as 4 honorable mentions. But first, a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. The Stanley Cup playoffs are here, and if you've never been to a live NHL playoff game, it's unlike anything else. The intensity, the speed, the energy in the building, it's absolutely next level. And thanks to Game Time, getting in the door is easier and more affordable than ever before. Game Time is the fastest way to grab playoff tickets. Even for those must-see matchups, prices actually drop as the puck drop gets closer, and with last-minute deals, you can save up to 60%. I absolutely love the all-in pricing at Game Time that shows all the total costs up front, so you know exactly what you're getting before you buy. And with Game Time ticket coverage, I know I'm protected, whether it's cancellation protection, job loss assurance, or their 24-hour return guarantee. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, let's keep this episode rolling in the final segment, breaking things down here in the final 21 to 28 and honorable mention range. And there's a lot of players here I want to give shout outs to. First off, we have Jacob Kvasnicka of the NTDP, who I have in the 80 to 90 range. He's an intense physical winger, constantly playing with pace. He's a kind of plug and play guy on the wing on that team that whenever there's a line that needs a bit of a boost in intensity and two-way ability and overall just insulating them a little bit with energy going both directions, Kvasnicka has been the guy this season, and he's been really good in terms of elevating more skilled players. The actual individual puck skills don't jump off the page with this player, and I don't think that there's really top 6 upside at the NHL level. But as a bottom 6 winger who can bring intensity and pace, I think there's a decent amount of things to swing on with this guy. He's off to a decent program as well in college, and overall, I think he's a player that is going to progress very nicely year upon year here after being picked, which I think is more than worth a swing in the 2nd or 4th round of this year's class. At 22, Danny Klaers is a right shot defenseman that is just unranked by like anyone out there, but I've really liked with the Muskegon Lumberjacks this season. Watched a lot of them, obviously, with Nestrašil and Ivan Ryabkin and Radivojevic playing on that team this season, and he's just constantly stuck out to me as a mobile, physically involved right shot defenseman. He moves very well, explosive lower body, aggressive gap control, moves up in the offensive zone to pinch and seal the wall, but gets back defensively to defend the rush as well, even when he does make those small offensive incursions. Doesn't take the biggest risks. And I think that he projects quite nicely as a 3rd pairing right shot defenseman in the NHL with that basis of mobility, defending the rush quite well, matching footwork comfortably, and just keeping his stick really, really constantly as a threat to steal possession and the poke poke checks and still not committing himself too far. He's a pretty controlled player, I think, while defending the rush, and overall a guy I would totally take a swing on in like the 4th or 5th round on draft day, but he might fall all the way to round 7 and even go undrafted. So if you're able to pick him up in that late round, I think that he's more than a worthy swing on draft day. Moving on to number 23, we have Teddy Murtyn from the Chicago Steel, also playing with the NTDP down the stretch here and playing with Team USA at the U18 World Championships. He's a very intense, physical, goal-scoring forward. You can play at center, you can play on the wing, probably a winger in terms of NHL projection. The awareness, the scanning habits, a bit inconsistent in this game, and the skating definitely needs some work. It's pretty ugly, but the intensity, the physicality, just constantly applying pressure and driving the middle of the ice, the puck protection habits and mechanics, and the overall power forward abilities, I think, are really interesting with this player, and a guy that I think is more than a value swing there in the 2nd or 3rd round, where he probably goes on draft day in the late 2nd to late 3rd. But if he's available beyond that, I think that he's a really solid option. Then we have Alex Misiak at number 24 in range 85 to 100. I haven't been overly impressed with his play this season, but it's kind of a projection with his game. He's intelligent. He can be intense in moments, but the actual consistency and stamina behind that haven't been the strongest this season with the Waterloo Blackhawks. But a player I think has really gotten more comfortable in the North American game after his first adaptation period in the first couple of weeks, which had some growing pains, and a guy that could definitely be a target in those middle rounds. At 25, Conrad Fondrk from the NTDP has some real flashes of dynamism and skill, but overall I think is a 90 to 105 range player. Because I don't really see that skill as projecting to the NHL level overly comfortably, but has a decent motor underneath him. The handling, the playmaking has some decent flashes. I can see why certain people have him ranked up into like the top 96 and even top 64 in their draft rankings, but I haven't fully seen that just yet this season. But I'm still going to be combing through more draft tape before I finalize my rankings, so you can still see some movement there. He's a guy that, in terms of pure skill, could definitely jump up the board here a little bit. Moving on, we have at 26, Anthony Allain-Samaké, who's a left-track defenseman from Montreal, playing with the Cedar Rapids Rough Riders in the U.S. Hockey League, and he's in my 100 to 115 range. He's a really mobile skater, constantly activating into the offensive zone, and the, I guess, intelligence behind the offensive activations give me some real excitement in terms of him, like, elevating his offensive game in the coming seasons. Even though the offensive production has been almost non-existent this campaign in the USHL, the habits underlying his offensive incursions and the offensive intelligence and the puck protection and the mobility and the flashes of playmaking skill, I think, could really translate to a very interesting player. He's a guy that could, with hindsight, be a top 64, top 50, top 32 kind of guy, but he's very raw. The inconsistency, the poor decision making, the missed reads while defending are all still real parts of his game that are going to have to be ironed out. But in terms of a project pick in the middle rounds, he's a very interesting option. At 27th overall, you have basically a 4th line center, and that's Andrew O'Neill from the NTDP. I think a pretty linear projection to play 4C in the NHL. He's pacey, he's intense, he's constantly pressuring the opposition. Good skater, constantly lifting sticks, getting underneath, establishing body position, but really limited in terms of the puck skills and the on-puck implications. The handling can fall apart under just a single bit of pressure. There's definitely lots to work on with this player, but I think that he has a lot of habits that project very nicely for an NHL role, and he probably won't need all that long to get to a level where he can play 4th line NHL minutes, maybe 2 or 3 seasons, but there isn't much growing room beyond that level, in my opinion. Last player that we have ranked here on the board is Bruno Idžan from the Lincoln Stars, a player who's transferred over here, the Croatian from the Alps Hockey League in about January or February, and he's been on a goal-scoring tear in Lincoln as a off-puck specialist. He has very little on-puck time for the amount of points he's put up this season. You look at the numbers and you think that he's like the offensive fulcrum, everything going through him, but he's much more of a complementary off-puck specialist. He finds little pockets of space. He's intelligent, very aware, constantly scanning the ice and finding those spaces, exploiting blind spots from defenders, and just making life hell for defenders in that sense at this level of play. But the skating, the intensity, real question marks, in my opinion. He has a pretty good shot, but the in-motion play, the pace, the dynamism are all still real question marks, where when I see this player, I don't really see what role he's going to inhabit at the NHL level as he's currently constructed. He's going to have to undergo a lot of evolution, I think, to become an NHLer, but the hockey brain is almost already at an NHL level. He's very intelligent, but so much still has to catch up in terms of the physical tools in his game that he's quite low down here on the list, but still a player I think is deserving of a swing on draft day. But let's wrap things up here with 4 honorable mentions, 2 of which I've watched significantly since our meeting and who've gone way up on my board. The first of which is Mason West, who I just didn't watch before our meeting. I was not tuned in on him somehow. I missed when he made the jump to the USHL with the Fargo Force after playing high school hockey with Edina in Minnesota. He's a dual sport athlete. He's a quarterback as well for Edina. He had 37 touchdown throws and 3 interceptions this season there as a 6'5", 6'6" junior quarterback in high school. So he's been living it up as a football player, but the hockey ability is really, really interesting, and he's going to be deciding on a path likely in May, whether he's choosing hockey or football. Football might seem more fun at this point from where he's at after being the high school quarterback for his school and obviously putting up great numbers, but the hockey game is very projectable in my opinion. He's really big. 6'5", 6'6", 195 pounds. Still a lot of his frame to fill out, but he's quite strong, but the contact habits still need a lot of work, but he thinks the game like a quarterback. His head is constantly on a swivel. His awareness, his mental map on the ice is high end, and he's just incessantly driving the middle lane, and he's carrying defenders with him with a gravitational pull to the net front, opening up space for his line mates. The puck skills have had really nice flashes overall in terms of skill and deception, but still has a lot of room to grow in terms of coming together consistently. But the runway as a middle 6 power forward type with that body, with that frame, and really like plus level skating, like 6.5 grade skating ability. There's so much to swing on. The profile is salivating if you're thinking in terms of the NHL projection. He's a guy that, if I were to rank my board right now, would fall into the 35 to 55 range overall and be very much contending for the top 10 on this board in the USHL, a very intriguing prospect. Then we have Aidan Park from the Green Bay Gamblers, an intelligent two-way center who actually made the jump to the WHL, weirdly, for the playoffs to join the Calgary Hitmen on their run, playing 2C, even on the first line here since making that leap over and playing very good hockey upon arrival in the WHL. And he's off to the University of Michigan next season to continue refining his game as well, which I think is a great landing spot for him. Alongside a player like Cole McKinney, they're adding 2 really solid two-way centers who need a bit of work in terms of skating, but have the intensity, have the intelligence down pat, and also have some offensive runway to keep adding tools to their toolkit. So Aidan Park, if I were to re-rank, would fall in my 60 to 70 range on this board, even as a re-entry. He's a D+1 player. Last but not least, we have 2 players I want to give honorable mentions to. First, we have Cooper Simpson, who has really shown in terms of the skating ability and the playmaking skill since making the jump to the USHL late in the season after playing high school hockey this season. And he's a guy to keep an eye on and could also be like rising significantly up my board here as I get more late season viewings in on him. And finally, we have the NTDP captain, Asher Barnett, a left shot defenseman who moves really well and just makes consistently intelligent decisions. He's a very projectable like third pairing defenseman on the left side. He can play the right side as well quite comfortably, where he's filled in for Carter Amico a lot this season. And he's a guy I think is just going to project very nicely for NHL teams as a plug and play guy once he makes the jump to the NHL, being intelligent, having the leadership capabilities, making a good first pass, and just not being flashy in any way, but likely being able to fill in a pretty reliable NHL role upon arrival if he does hit that upside on a bottom pairing capacity. But that wraps things up here for our USHL rankings episode. If you're still listening here at the end, thanks so much for sticking around. This was a lot of me talking about the guys I've been watching very closely here this season. If you want more insights on these players, you can go over at eliteprospects.com on any of these guys' player profiles. I have game reports written on them if you do have an Elite Prospects premium subscription, and there's a lot more details on the minutia of the details and the habits there if you're curious about these guys. But if you've you've watched these players, I'm very curious to hear what your thoughts are on them down below. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please do make sure to make us your first listen of the day. We always appreciate our everydayers here on the podcast. For your second listen today, you can head on over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey, where Flip and Steel break down everything you need to know to build yourself a competitive and sustainable fantasy roster. But that wraps things up here for us today. Thanks so much for tuning in. As always, I'm your host, Sebastian High, and I hope to catch you listening again very, very soon.